Please help my mommy. They're hurting her." The desperate scream tore through the quiet of the urban avenue like thunder before a storm. Her small voice trembled with terror and heartbreak, echoing across the wide parking lot of a lavish glass high-rise. The little girl, Emily Thompson, only 5 years old, dressed in a neat blue dress now wrinkled and dusty, ran barefoot toward a group of riders parked across the road. Tears streaked her olive cheeks as she stumbled, clutching the hem of her dress, her sobs slicing through the calm evening air. Across the street, a few of the riders turned in confusion. Engines hummed softly beneath the starry purple sky. The largest of them, a broad man with tattoos across his forearms, removed his helmet slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to deep concern. But before the moment of rescue ever came, before those engines roared to life, the day had begun like any other for Sarah Thompson. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and let us know where you're watching us from in the comment below. Finally, make us a promise to share this video with your loved ones if you enjoy the story. Let's get started. That evening, the sun had set gently over the bustling urban district, where the Hale Tower stood like a fortress of steel and glass. Inside the gates, wealth gleamed everywhere: polished granite floors, silver chandeliers, and a parking lot large enough to host a gala. But beneath all that luxury, unseen and unappreciated, Sarah Thompson was already working. Sarah was a Latina-American custodian, 45, graceful but weary. Her back ached from years of bending over cold floors. Her hands were rough from bleach and soap, yet she kept her uniform spotless, her hair neatly tied back, and her smile warm. Not because she loved her work, but because she needed it. After losing her husband in a factory accident years ago, Sarah had no one but her daughter, Emily. Everything she did, every aching scrub, every sleepless night was for her. The high-rise wasn't just her workplace, it was her battlefield. Every day she fought against exhaustion, against unfairness, against invisibility. In the small staff quarters at the back of the high-rise, Emily sat cross-legged on the tiled floor, coloring with a worn-out crayon set. "Mama, look, I drew a big building like this one," she said proudly, pointing at her scribbles. Sarah smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. "It's beautiful, baby. Maybe one day you'll live in one that's yours." Emily giggled. "And you too, Mama. We'll have a big office and no one yelling at you." That last line stung. Sarah looked away, folding towels slowly. "One day, sweetie," she whispered. Just after 7, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach tighten. Richard Hale, the billionaire. His voice came through cold and impatient. "Sarah, I want this entire high-rise spotless. Every single room. I've got investors coming tonight." Sarah paused, swallowing the ache in her chest. "Yes, sir. I've already done the lobby and I don't care what's done," he cut in sharply. "I said everything." The line went dead. Sarah stood still for a moment, the silence pressing heavy around her. She had barely slept the night before, scrubbing the executive suites until past midnight. Her chest still hurt from bending over for so long, but she straightened herself, breathed deeply, and got back to work. "Mama?" Emily asked softly. "Can we go home early today? You're tired." Sarah forced a smile. "I'll try, baby, but Mr. Hale needs everything perfect." So she worked room after room, dusting, sweeping, polishing. The smell of chemicals clung to her clothes. By nightfall, her knees were sore, her palms raw. Sweat rolled down her temple as she wiped the last of the conference room tables. Emily tried to help, holding a damp rag twice her size. "Mama, can I wipe this one too?" Sarah chuckled weakly. "Sure, baby. Just be careful." They were still working when the deep rumble of engines filled the air outside. Expensive cars, sleek, dark, and loud, rolled up the long parking lot. Sarah's stomach tightened. She wasn't done. Richard Hale stepped out first, his designer suit gleaming, his gold watch flashing in the moonlight. 3 of his business associates followed, men with sharp smiles and whiskey on their breath. They laughed about deals and money as they entered the high-rise. The moment Richard saw Sarah still cleaning, his expression curdled. "What is this?" he snapped. "You had all day, Sarah. I told you this place needed to shine." "I am sorry, sir," Sarah stammered, wiping her forehead. "I just finished the East Wing and was about to start here. I've been working since afternoon." Before she could finish, he struck the mop from her hands. The wet handle clattered across the floor. "Don't give me excuses," he roared, his voice echoing through the granite halls. His friends exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. One chuckled nervously, sipping his drink. Sarah stepped back, trembling. "Please, sir, I'll finish it. Just give me a few more minutes." But Richard's pride was wounded. He could feel the eyes of his associates watching, judging. "You think you can embarrass me in my own building? In front of my guests? I didn't mean to." "Shut up!" he shouted. The words hit harder than any slap. Then he shoved her hard. Sarah stumbled against the counter, the edge digging into her arm. She gasped, biting back tears. "Mama!" Emily screamed, running forward. "Stop hurting her!" Richard turned, glaring at the little girl. "Get that brat out of here!" Emily's small frame shook as tears poured down her cheeks. "Leave my mama alone!" she cried again, her voice breaking. One of the men muttered, "Man, just fire her already." But Richard wasn't listening. His rage had turned into something darker, the kind of cruelty that power feeds. Sarah raised her hands in defense, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, she's just a child." Richard grabbed her wrist and yanked her toward the bucket of water. The sound of her cry echoed through the hall. That was the moment Emily ran, her tiny feet slapping against the granite, her sobs echoing behind her. She pushed open the front door and burst into the moonlight, sprinting across the parking lot, through the open gates, and into the street. Her heart pounded, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. And then she saw them, the riders, lined up beside their motorcycles, leather vests shining in the moon, tattoos glinting like armor. They looked rough, dangerous, but they were her only hope. "Please," she screamed, her voice trembling. "The billionaire is beating my mama." The leader, Jake Ramirez, blinked, disbelief flashing across his face. Then his jaw tightened. He stepped forward, kneeling before her, his deep voice calm but urgent. "Where is she, sweetheart?" Emily pointed back toward the high-rise, sobbing. "Inside. Please hurry." Jake's hand went to his helmet as he turned to his men. "Bear ride with me." Engines roared to life, and as they sped toward the high-rise, the world, for the first time that night, was no longer silent. The moon had begun to rise behind the manicured lawns of the Hale estate, but inside the high-rise, the air was thick with exhaustion and bleach. Sarah Thompson moved slowly down the corridor, her back bent, her hands trembling from hours of scrubbing granite floors. The reflection of a chandelier above her shimmered across the wet surface like liquid silver, mocking her fatigue. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but she kept going. She always kept going. Her daughter, Emily, trailed behind with a small towel, wiping baseboards that were already clean. "Emily, baby," Sarah whispered, forcing a smile. "You don't have to help Mama tonight." "I want to, Mama," the little girl said softly, her big brown eyes full of innocence. "If I help, we can finish faster." Sarah stopped for a second, watching her daughter's tiny hands press against the wall. The blue dress she wore now smudged with dust. A pang of guilt twisted in Sarah's chest. She wanted to tell her baby to rest, to dream, to play like other children, not grow up in the shadow of a mop and broom, but life had not given them that choice. I love you, baby girl, Sarah murmured, kneeling to kiss Emily's forehead. Emily smiled tiredly. I love you too, Mama. One day I'll buy you a big building and you won't have to clean nobody's floor again. Those words made Sarah's throat tighten. Maybe one day, sweetheart, she said, but for now we keep working. The high-rise felt unnervingly silent. Even the ticking of the ornate clock sounded loud. Sarah could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She was late. She knew it. Mr. Hale had told her everything needed to be perfect before midnight, but time had slipped through her hands like water. By the time she finished the guest wing, her knees were stiff, her hands raw. She looked at her reflection in the polished floor, a weary woman in a faded gray uniform, sweat glistening across her forehead. Just one more room, she whispered to herself. Just one more and we can go home. But her chest tightened suddenly. She gripped the mop handle, feeling lightheaded. The room swayed slightly. She sat down on the edge of a couch, breathing hard. Emily ran to her, eyes wide with worry. Mama, are you okay? Sarah nodded weakly. Just tired. Baby, I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Her body was breaking down slowly, quietly, under the weight of endless labor, but stopping meant losing her job. Losing her job meant losing their home. She couldn't risk that. She rose again, ignoring the dizziness, and began mopping the last hallway. Outside, the growl of engines grew louder, the unmistakable sound of luxury cars rolling up the long parking lot. Sarah froze. Her heart sank. Richard Hale had returned. The laughter of men echoed from the front doors. Their footsteps clicked on the granite like thunder. Sarah. Richard's sharp voice sliced through the air. Where are you? Sarah wiped her face quickly with the back of her arm. Here, sir, she called, trying to steady her voice. The billionaire appeared in the doorway, his tailored suit glowing under the chandelier light. Behind him stood 3 of his business associates, men with slicked back hair and glasses of whiskey in hand. Their laughter filled the hall, loud and careless. Richard's eyes scanned the room, then narrowed on Sarah, still holding her mop. You're still cleaning. I'm almost done, sir, she stammered. I just wanted to finish this part before you came in. He glanced around, his lip curling. Almost done. This place looks like a mess. It didn't. Every surface shone. Every vase gleamed. But Richard wasn't looking for cleanliness. He was looking for control. His friends watched, smirking, enjoying the show. One of them chuckled. She's got spirit, Richard. You sure you're not too hard on her? Richard sneered. If I wanted your opinion, I'd ask for it. Then he turned back to Sarah. You think this is how a professional works? You embarrass me, Sarah, in front of my guests. Sarah's throat tightened. Sir, I didn't mean to. Shut up! The shout made Emily jump. She dropped her towel and ran to her mother's side, clutching her leg. Please don't yell at my mama. Richard's cold eyes darted to the child. Get her out of here. Sarah stepped protectively in front of Emily. She's my daughter, sir. She's not hurting anyone. Not hurting anyone? Richard's tone rose, his ego wounded by her defiance. You bring a child into my high-rise when I'm expecting guests? Do you have any idea who you work for? Sarah's voice broke. Please, sir, I needed the money. I couldn't leave her alone. I'll work through the night if I have to. Just, Richard cut her off, his face red with anger. You'll do as I say, or you'll be out on the street. He grabbed the mop from her hands and hurled it across the floor. It clattered loudly, echoing through the hall. Emily began to cry, clinging tighter to her mother. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. I'm sorry, sir. I'll finish it. Please don't shout in front of my daughter. Richard's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. One muttered, Richard, maybe. But Richard wasn't listening. His pride burned too fiercely. You're lucky I even let you clean this place. You should be grateful. He shoved Sarah backward. She stumbled against a chair, pain shooting through her arm. Emily screamed. "Stop it!" she cried, running toward him. "Don't hurt my mama!" Her small hands pushed against his leg, but he barely noticed. He raised his voice again, furious, his hand twitching as if to strike Sarah again. That was the moment everything stopped. Emily's scream turned into a sob so sharp it pierced through the walls. She turned and ran, her little feet slapping against the granite, her cries echoing through the grand hallway, out the open doors, down the high-rise steps. Sarah fell to her knees, her voice breaking. Emily! No. But her daughter was already gone, sprinting toward the road, toward hope, toward strangers who might finally listen. And inside that high-rise, beneath the silver glow of wealth and cruelty, shadows gathered, marking the moment when power would meet its reckoning. The high-rise was a symphony of silence after Emily's footsteps vanished into the distance. For a moment, the only sound that filled the grand hall was Sarah's ragged breathing and the faint ticking of a crystal clock on the wall. Richard Hale stood in front of her, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with arrogance. His guests, 3 polished men in expensive suits, exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that the situation had spiraled beyond what they found amusing. "Look what you made me do," Richard muttered, his voice dripping with anger and pride. "You embarrass me in my own building in front of my partners. Do you think you're special? You're nothing here, Sarah, nothing." Sarah slowly rose from the floor, her knees shaking. She didn't look him in the eye. She couldn't. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. Her arms trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. Please, my daughter's outside. Let me find her. She's only 5. But Richard's fury wasn't about to let her go. His ego was louder than her. "Please. You think you can walk out when I'm talking to you?" He took a step forward, his voice echoing against the granite walls. "You'll finish cleaning this building before you leave, or I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Sarah flinched, but didn't move. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders, but a different strength began to stir. The instinct of a mother. "Sir, please," she whispered again. "She's my only child. One of Richard's guests, a tall man with silver hair, finally stepped in. Richard, maybe let her go find the girl. She's terrified." Richard turned on him, his eyes flashing. "You shut your mouth. This is my building. I'll handle my staff how I want." The man sighed, glancing at the floor. No one else dared to speak. Sarah stood frozen, torn between fear and defiance. Her lip quivered. "You don't have to do this, sir. I've worked for you for 2 years. I've never once been late, never once disrespected you. Please, I'm begging you, just let me go get my baby." But her words fell on deaf ears. Richard's face twisted, consumed by power. He raised his hand again, not in warning this time, but in anger, and the moment his palm struck her cheek, the sharp sound cracked through the hall like thunder. Sarah gasped. Her body staggered backward, crashing into the wall. Pain seared through her face and chest, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She pressed her hand against her cheek and whispered, trembling, "God, please give me strength." Richard sneered. "Clean it up," he ordered coldly, before turning away to pour himself another drink. But what he didn't know was that help was already coming. Outside the high-rise, engines roared to life. Across the street, the riders were no longer standing idly by. Jake Ramirez, the broad-shouldered leader with tattoos up his arms, had just knelt in front of the sobbing little girl who had run to them. "Where is she, sweetheart?" he asked again, his voice steady but urgent. Emily pointed towards the high-rise, her small hands trembling. "Inside, he's hurting my mama." Jake's eyes darkened. He didn't need another word. He turned to his crew. 5 men in black leather vests, their faces hard, but hearts suddenly moved. "Bear Ridehawk with me." Jake barked. "The rest stay here with the kid." The riders didn't ask questions. They climbed onto their Harleys, the engines rumbling like thunder beneath the evening moon. As they sped down the street, dust kicked up behind them, the sound shaking the calm neighborhood awake. Inside, Richard turned at the faint vibration of the engines. His guests looked up, too, frowning. "You expecting more visitors?" one of them asked. Richard's brows furrowed. "What the hell is that?" Before anyone could answer, the heavy front doors burst open. Jake Ramirez strode in first, his boots thudding against the granite floor. Behind him came 2 other riders, their leather vests glinting under the chandelier's light. The air shifted instantly. Power no longer belonged to money, but to presence. Richard's eyes widened. "Who the hell are you?" Jake's gaze swept across the room, the shattered bucket, the mop, the trembling woman pressed against the wall. Then his eyes locked on Richard. "You the one who's been hitting her?" Richard's face turned red. "You better get out of my building before I call the cops." Jake took a step closer, unflinching. "You won't need to call them. They'll be here soon enough." Richard's friends backed away slowly, unsure of what was about to happen. "I don't know who you think you are," Richard spat, "but you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Jake tilted his head slightly, his voice calm, but filled with fire. "The only mistake I see is a man who thinks money gives him the right to hurt people." The room went still. Sarah's breath hitched as Jake stepped between her and Richard, his frame shielding her. For the first time that night, she felt safe. Not because someone was fighting for her, but because someone finally saw her. Richard tried to push past him, but Jake's hand shot out, gripping his wrist mid-swing. The motion was swift, effortless. "Don't," Jake said simply. Richard's face contorted with rage, but the power dynamic had changed. The king in his castle was suddenly just a man cornered by his own cruelty. "Get your hands off me," Richard shouted. Jake didn't move. "You touch her again," he said in a low voice, "and I swear no amount of money will protect you." Richard froze, reading something dangerous in the rider's eyes. Not recklessness, but conviction. The distant wail of sirens broke the silence. Someone had called the police. Maybe a neighbor, maybe one of Richard's frightened guests. Either way, justice was closing in. Sarah's knees gave out and she slid to the floor, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Emily's cries echoed faintly from outside as one of the riders carried her into the doorway. When Jake turned to look at Sarah, his expression softened. "You okay, ma'am?" She nodded weakly, her voice shaking. "Thank you. Thank you for coming." Jake offered her his leather jacket to cover her torn uniform. "Nobody lays hands on a woman like you. Not while I'm breathing." And as the sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue across the high-rise's gleaming windows, Richard's empire of arrogance began to crumble, one act of kindness at a time. The door slammed open so hard that it rattled against the wall. Emily burst through it, her small feet slapping against the granite steps as she ran out into the blinding evening moon. Her blue dress fluttered behind her like a desperate flag of innocence. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable, her breaths coming in sharp gasps. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, away from the shouting, the breaking glass, the cruel laughter that filled the air behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. "Mama?" she whispered between sobs, stumbling down the stone steps. "Please, somebody help my mama." The vast parking lot stretched endlessly before her, the polished cars gleaming, the high-rise towering like a monster behind her. She reached the front gates, pushed them open with all her tiny strength, and ran out onto the quiet urban avenue. The world outside the high-rise was calm, almost too calm. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the moon glared down mercilessly, mocking her panic. That's when she saw them. Across the road, lined neatly by the curb, were riders, big men in black leather jackets, standing near their motorcycles that gleamed under the moonlight. To Emily, they looked like giants, tattoos, heavy boots, and faces that could have scared any adult. But something in her, the small spark of hope only a child carries, pushed her forward. She ran toward them, stumbling, her tiny voice breaking through her tears. "Please help my mommy. They're hurting her." The sound of her cry made every head turn. The largest of them, a bald man with a trimmed beard and eyes full of calm authority, stepped forward. His name was Jake Ramirez, leader of the rider crew, known around town not for trouble, but for brotherhood. His rough hands had seen fights and roads, but his heart had seen pain, and he recognized it in the child's voice. He knelt to her level, his broad frame lowering with surprising gentleness. Hey, he said softly, his voice deep but steady. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Who's hurting your mama?" Emily hiccuped through her sobs, pointing back toward the high-rise. "The man in that big building, the one they all call the Billionaire, he's beating my mama. Please help her." Jake's eyes hardened. Behind him, his brothers, Bear, Falcon, and Spike, exchanged grim looks. Bear, a heavily tattooed man with kind eyes, stepped closer. "You sure, little one?" Emily nodded, tears glistening in her lashes. He was yelling, and she fell. And he hit her again. Her voice cracked, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. Jake looked up at the high-rise, its tall windows reflecting the moon like cold eyes. He'd ridden past that building 100 times, never thinking twice. But now hearing a child beg for help, the building looked like something else entirely, a cage of power and cruelty. He stood slowly, his leather vest shifting as he moved. "Bear ride, Falcon with me," he said firmly. "The rest of you stay here and keep the girl safe." One of the younger riders crouched beside Emily, offering her a bottle of water and his jacket. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he said softly. "They'll bring your mama back." Jake turned back to Emily for a final word. "What's your name, Angel?" "Emily," she whispered. He nodded. "You're brave, Emily. Stay right here. We'll go get your mama." And then he put on his helmet, the engine of his Harley roaring to life with a thunderous growl that made the pavement tremble. The other two followed suit, their engines forming a chorus of power and determination. As they sped off, the sound filled the quiet neighborhood, raw, angry, unstoppable. Inside the high-rise, Richard's fury still echoed. He paced across the room, drink in hand, muttering about respect and obedience. His guests had grown silent, uncomfortable, shifting near the doorway. Then, faintly at first, came the sound, engines approaching fast. Richard frowned, turning toward the windows. "What the hell is that?" Before anyone could answer, 3 motorcycles tore into the parking lot, stopping in perfect sync. The engines cut off. Dust hung in the air. Jake Ramirez stepped off his bike first, his boots crunching against the gravel. He glanced at the high-rise, towering, pretentious, spotless. "Nice building," he muttered. Shame about the man living in it. The front doors opened. Richard appeared, confusion twisting into annoyance. "Who are you people? What do you think you're doing on my property?" Jake's jaw tightened as he climbed the steps. "We came for the woman you're hurting." Richard laughed, though his voice wavered. "What? You people lost or something? You've got no idea who you're talking to." "Oh, I do," Jake said calmly. "And I don't care who you are." Richard's smile faded. "You better leave before you what?" Jake interrupted, stepping closer, his voice low and heavy. "Hit someone else smaller than you. Go ahead, try it." Richard froze, caught off guard by the steady rage in Jake's tone. Behind him, Bear and Falcon stood like sentinels, silent, immovable. "You don't belong here," Richard hissed. Jake crossed his arms. "Neither does fear. So, why don't you call her out and see how she feels about what you've done?" The tension thickened. Even Richard's guests seemed to shrink under the rider's steady gaze. From somewhere inside, faint footsteps echoed, hesitant, slow. Then Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale, one sleeve torn, her eyes wide with disbelief. When she saw Jake standing there, she froze. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Friends," Jake said simply. "Your daughter sent us." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "Emily, she's safe. She's safe," Jake replied gently. "And now so are you." And in that moment, under the blazing moon in front of the high-rise built on pride and power, the world shifted. For the first time, Sarah wasn't alone. The air outside the high-rise was still, but the silence carried tension heavy enough to choke on. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "Who are you people?" Jake Ramirez, the rider leader, took a step forward. His boots thudded softly against the granite steps. "Friends," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. "Your little girl found us. She said you needed help." Sarah's heart clenched. "Emily, she got away. She did." Jake nodded. "She's safe with my crew across the street. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a split second, Sarah's tired face softened with relief. But the peace didn't last. Behind her, Richard Hale's furious voice echoed from inside the hall. "What the hell is going on out there?" He appeared in the doorway a moment later, his sharp suit slightly wrinkled, his ego very much intact. He froze when he saw Jake and his men standing at his doorstep. 3 massive figures dressed in black leather, tattoos glinting under the moonlight, their expressions unshaken. Richard's lips twisted into a smirk. "You've got to be kidding me. Who invited the zoo?" Jake didn't flinch. "We came because your name was screamed in fear. That's not something I ignore." Richard scoffed. "You're trespassing. You have no idea who you're talking to." Jake's gaze hardened. "You're right. I don't care who I'm talking to, but I know exactly what you are." That line made the air go cold. The other 2 riders, Bear and Falcon, spread slightly apart, forming a silent wall of presence behind their leader. Richard laughed, his arrogance returning in full force. "Oh, this is rich. A bunch of leather-wearing nobodies think they can come to my building and play heroes." He stepped closer, his eyes sharp and mocking. "You should turn around before this gets ugly." Jake didn't move. It already is. Richard's jaw flexed. "You think you're intimidating me?" "I don't have to," Jake said quietly. "You did that yourself when you laid hands on her." The tension between them crackled like live wire. Richard's business associates hovered in the background, whispering among themselves. None of them dared to intervene, but their expressions showed unease. The balance of power, once so clearly in Richard's favor, was shifting fast. Sarah stood near the door, torn between fear and disbelief. She wanted to scream to stop them all, but her voice wouldn't come. Her eyes darted between the men, between cruelty and courage, and something inside her broke. "Please," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want any more trouble. I just want to take my daughter and go." Richard turned to her sharply. "You're not going anywhere until I say you can." That was it. The moment Jake's restraint snapped. He took 2 firm steps forward until he stood inches from Richard. His voice dropped to a low growl. "You don't own her. You don't own anyone." Richard tried to stand his ground, but Jake's presence was overwhelming. "You better leave before I have you arrested." Richard hissed, his voice shaking slightly. Jake tilted his head. "You think the police will protect you when they see what you've done?" Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. Then, in one swift motion, Jake shoved him backward. Not hard enough to hurt, just enough to make a point. Richard stumbled, the sudden loss of control wiping the smugness off his face. "Listen to me," Jake said, his voice steady like a storm about to break. "You don't get to scream at her, you don't get to hit her, you don't get to make her feel small just because you've got money. Not while I'm standing here." For a moment, no one breathed. Bear and Falcon stood ready behind Jake, fists clenched, eyes sharp. Richard's guests were frozen. Even the sound of the wind outside seemed to fade. Then Richard exploded. "You think I'm scared of you? I could buy your whole gang 10 times over." He lunged forward, shoving Jake's chest. That was his last mistake. In a single fluid motion, Jake grabbed Richard's wrist, twisting it downward until the billionaire dropped his glass, the crystal shattering across the granite. "You're lucky I'm not the kind of man you think I am," Jake said quietly. "Because if I was, you'd already be on the ground." Richard winced, his pride collapsing faster than his composure. From behind them, Sarah's voice broke through, quiet but firm. "Please stop." Jake looked at her, his eyes softening instantly. He released Richard's arm and stepped back. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. Sarah nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I am now." Richard stood there panting, clutching his wrist, glaring at everyone like a cornered animal. But the fury in his eyes had turned to fear. He could hear something distant, faint at first, but growing louder, the wail of police sirens. A neighbor had called. Justice was on its way. Jake looked out the window toward the sound. "Looks like your guests are about to meet some new company," he said. Richard turned pale. You called them." "No," Jake replied. The truth did. The other riders stepped back as the flashing lights reflected through the glass doors. Sarah exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as relief washed over her. "Thank you," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jake gave a slight nod. "Don't thank me, ma'am. Thank your daughter. She's the brave one." Through the open doors, Emily's voice suddenly called out, "Mama!" Sarah turned instantly. Her baby ran across the parking lot, barefoot, crying. Sarah dropped to her knees, catching her in her arms. They clung to each other like the world might vanish if they let go. And for the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel powerless. Behind her, the riders stood quietly, the hum of approaching sirens wrapping the scene in finality. Jake watched them, mother and child reunited, love shining through pain, and muttered under his breath, "This world's got too many men like him, and not enough like her." He turned toward his bike, moonlight reflecting off his vest. The red and blue lights flashed brighter across the granite steps. The high-rise that once symbolized control was now just a building filled with echoes of shame. And as the police cars came to a stop, the man who thought he owned everything stood with nothing left at all. Red and blue lights sliced through the white granite of the high-rise's parking lot, painting the once quiet estate in streaks of justice. The hum of police radios, the low rumble of Harley engines, and the muffled sobs of a mother and child blended into a single trembling harmony of chaos and relief. Sarah Thompson knelt on the gravel, clutching her daughter tightly. Emily buried her face in her mother's neck, whispering through her tears, "I thought you were gone, Mama." Sarah's voice was broken, but steady. "No, baby. I'm right here. I'm never leaving you." Behind them, Jake Ramirez stood with his arms crossed, his vest flapping lightly in the wind from the arriving squad cars. His eyes stayed locked on the high-rise door on the man who had caused all this pain. Richard Hale stood there, pale under the flashing lights, his once immaculate suit wrinkled, his tie loose. His arrogance had drained away, replaced by a flicker of something that almost looked like fear. 2 police officers approached him, their expressions unreadable. One of the officers, a broad Asian man with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Sir, we got a call about a possible assault. You want to tell me what's going on here?" Richard tried to straighten his tie. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I'm the one being harassed. These riders broke into my property." The officer's gaze shifted toward Jake, who stood silent, then to Sarah, whose cheek was swollen and uniform torn. Her trembling hands still clutched Emily's small fingers. "Ma'am," the officer said gently, "are you the victim here?" Sarah swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir." "Oh, he hit me." Richard barked out a laugh, forced and unsteady. "Oh, please! She's lying! You know how people like her?" Like her, the officer interrupted sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Watch your next words, sir." Richard froze, realizing too late that the room for his kind of power had just closed. Jake took a slow step forward, his voice steady. "We saw the aftermath. We heard the little girl screaming. She came running for help while you were too busy playing God." Richard's face flushed red. "You people have no idea who I am." The second officer, a woman with her hair tied back, raised an eyebrow. "We don't care who you are. We care about what you did." A hush fell over the parking lot. Even the other riders, Bear Falcon and Spike, stood still, their eyes hard. Sarah took a shaky breath. "He's been treating me like this for months," she said softly. "Long hours, no rest. He threatened to fire me if I ever complained." "But tonight?" he snapped. Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He hit me in front of my daughter. The officer nodded slowly, pulling a small notepad from his vest. "We'll take it from here." Richard sneered. "You can't arrest me. I'm Richard Hale. I know the mayor, the sheriff." The officer raised a hand. "You can explain all that downtown." Before Richard could finish his protest, the metallic click of handcuffs cut through his words. The sight of the billionaire's wrists locked in steel drew murmurs from his guests, who now stood awkwardly by their cars, pretending they hadn't been laughing an hour ago. As the officers led him down the steps, Richard tried to twist away. "You can't do this. She's a liar." They broke in. Jake stepped aside, blocking his path for a moment. "Funny thing about lies," he said quietly. "They don't sound so good when truth walks in the room." Richard glared at him, but Jake didn't move. The 2 men locked eyes, arrogance versus honor, until Richard finally looked away. When the squad car door shut, the world outside seemed to exhale. Sarah's knees gave out, and she sank to the ground. Jake was there before she could fall completely, steadying her by the shoulder. "Oh, you're safe now," he said gently. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Jake replied. "You thank me by getting back up." Emily looked up at the big man, her tiny hand still gripping her mother's. "You're a superhero," she whispered shyly. Jake chuckled softly, kneeling to her level. "Nah, kid. Your mama's the hero. I just showed up late." The little girl smiled faintly for the first time that night. Behind them, one of the younger riders approached, holding a folded leather jacket. "Boss," he said to Jake. "Thought she could use this." Jake took it and draped it around Sarah's shoulders. The black leather looked out of place on her cleaning uniform. Yet somehow it fit. It was protection, respect, a symbol that she wasn't alone anymore. The older officer approached again. Ma'am, we'll need your statement, and we'll make sure you and your daughter have a place to stay tonight. Sarah nodded, still holding Emily close. Thank you, sir. As the police cars rolled away with Richard Hale inside, the high-rise lights dimmed behind them, casting long shadows across the parking lot. For years, Sarah had walked through those same doors feeling small, invisible, and powerless. But tonight, as she stood beside the men who had listened to her daughter's cry, she felt something new, something warm, almost foreign. Dignity. Jake turned toward his crew. We'll follow them to the station. Make sure she's okay. Bear nodded, already on it. Before he climbed back onto his bike, Jake looked once more at Sarah and Emily. You did good, kid, he said softly. Both of you. Emily hugged her mama tighter, whispering, Mama, he's like an angel. Sarah smiled faintly, tears tracing lines down her face. Maybe God still sends them, baby. They just ride motorcycles now. As the engine started again, their roar filled the night. Not with chaos, but with something else. Strength, protection, justice. And for the first time, the high-rise at the top of the hill no longer looked powerful. It looked empty. The following morning dawned gently. No sirens, no shouting, no sound of breaking glass. Only the rustle of the wind through motel curtains and the quiet hum of traffic somewhere far away. Sarah Thompson sat on the edge of a small motel bed, still wearing the oversized black leather jacket Jake had placed around her shoulders the night before. Its weight comforted her, not because of the material, but because of what it meant. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Emily was curled beside her, fast asleep, her small hand clutching the sleeve of her mother's jacket. Strands of her curly hair rested gently over her face. Even in sleep, she looked exhausted, like the night's fear had chased her into her dreams. Sarah reached out and brushed a tear from her daughter's cheek. You're safe now, baby, she whispered. Mama's got you. A soft knock came at the door. Sarah tensed, instinct from years of living cautiously until a familiar deep voice called from outside. It's Jake. She exhaled and stood, opening the door slowly. Jake stood in the morning light, a cup of coffee in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. His leather vest gleamed faintly under the sun, and the smell of gasoline and road dust followed him like a second skin. Morning, he said quietly. Didn't mean to wake you. Sarah shook her head, managing a small smile. We were already up. I don't sleep much these days. He handed her the bag. Breakfast. Pancakes for the kid. Sandwich for you. Her eyes softened. You didn't have to do that. He shrugged. Didn't have to do a lot of things. But sometimes the right thing ain't about having to. Sarah looked down at the steaming coffee and blinked fast, swallowing the lump in her throat. Thank you, she said softly. Inside, Jake took a seat in the corner chair, careful not to intrude. His eyes scanned the small room. 2 beds, 1 flickering TV, a half-packed duffel bag, and then rested on Emily. She's a strong kid, he said. Didn't cry once after you fell asleep. Sarah smiled faintly. She's stronger than me, I think. Nah, Jake said, shaking his head. She just learned it from her mama. For a long moment, the room was quiet, except for the soft clink of the coffee cup in Sarah's hands. Then she asked the question that had been clawing at her heart all morning. What happens now? Jake leaned back, sighing. Cops got Richard booked for assault and harassment. Looks like there's a history with his workers. People too scared to talk until now. You started something, Sarah. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone he ever stepped on. Sarah looked down, shaking her head. I didn't mean to start anything. I just wanted to survive. Yeah, Jake said. "And sometimes surviving is the revolution." Her eyes welled with tears. She covered her face with one hand, trying to hide it. But Jake noticed. "Hey," he said softly, his tone gentle. "It's over now. You did good." Sarah laughed weakly through her tears. "I'm not used to anyone telling me that." Jake's voice softened even more. "You will be." Later that day, the motel parking lot was alive with sound. The low growl of motorcycle engines, the laughter of men who had seen too much of the world but never stopped protecting it. Bear and Falcon had come with groceries, dropping them off quietly without ceremony. "For the kid," Bear said, placing a paper bag full of cereal, milk, and fruit on the dresser. "Our way of saying she's one of us now." Emily giggled when she saw them, hiding shyly behind her mother's legs before finally stepping out to wave. "Hi, Mr. Ryder," she said, grinning. Bear chuckled. "That's Bear, kiddo. You can call me Mr. Bear if you want to make me feel old." Jake smirked from the corner. "You are old." Their laughter filled the tiny room. Deep, genuine healing. It was the kind of laughter that builds bridges between worlds. For Sarah, the sound was almost surreal. Just 24 hours ago, she had been scrubbing floors in fear. Now she stood surrounded by men society called dangerous, but who had shown her more kindness than any man in a suit ever had. By evening, a knock came at the door again. This time a police officer in plain clothes, the same man from the night before. "Miss Thompson," he said warmly. "We finished your report. You're free to go wherever you want. There's also a local women's advocacy group offering you temporary housing and a job at the community center." Sarah blinked in disbelief. "A job?" He smiled. "Seems the city's been following your story since this morning. Word spreads fast when riders save a custodian from a billionaire." Jake chuckled quietly. "Didn't do it for headlines?" The officer nodded. "Maybe not, but people need stories like yours right now. Reminds them that they're still good out there." Sarah placed a hand over her chest. I don't know what to say." Jake looked at her with a faint smile. "Say yes." She nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes." That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon orange, Sarah and Emily stood outside the motel, watching the riders prepare to leave. The engines rumbled like thunder rolling away from a storm. Emily ran up to Jake holding a small piece of paper. It was a drawing. Stick figures of motorcycles, a woman and a little girl holding hands. "This is us," she said proudly. "You're the one with the big arms." Jake laughed softly, taking the drawing. "I'll keep this, kid. Promise." He folded it carefully and tucked it inside his vest. "That's going wherever I ride." As they rode off into the twilight, Sarah stood with her arm around her daughter, the wind from the motorcycles brushing against their faces like a blessing. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a worker. She felt like a woman who had survived the storm and found family in the unlikeliest hearts. By the next morning, the story had already left the motel. What began as a frightened cry from a 5-year-old girl had become a wave spreading through every street, diner, and radio station in town. Riders save custodian and daughter from abusive billionaire. That was the headline printed in bold across the morning paper. At the diner down the highway, truckers read it aloud over coffee. In grocery stores, mothers whispered it to one another while pushing carts down the aisles. And in schools, teachers showed their students the article and said softly, "See, even strangers can be heroes." The story traveled fast, not because of who Richard Hale was, but because of who Sarah Thompson had always been. The woman everyone had seen cleaning floors for years, but had never really seen. At the small motel room that had become their temporary home, Sarah sat by the window, holding Emily close as morning light filled the space. A knock came at the door again, this time lighter, hesitant. When she opened it, she found 2 women from the city's community outreach center standing there with warm smiles and clipboards in hand. "Mrs. Thompson," one asked kindly, "we came to see how you and your daughter are holding up. The whole city's been talking about you." Sarah looked down, unsure. "Talking about me?" "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "You inspired a lot of people. We wanted to offer you a more permanent place to stay. A small apartment near the city square. Rent-free for the next 6 months while you get back on your feet." Sarah blinked, speechless. I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," Jake's voice called from behind her. Sarah turned to find him leaning against the railing, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. He must have come by early, checking in as always. The women turned, startled, then smiled. "You must be the riders everyone's talking about. So, Bear and Falcon appeared behind Jake, both holding grocery bags. "Guilty?" Bear said with a grin. "But we come in peace." Emily ran forward and threw her arms around Jake's leg. "You came back," she cried. He looked down, chuckling softly. "Told you we would, didn't I?" Sarah watched, tears threatening her eyes again, not from sorrow this time, but from a kind of joy that came only after surviving the worst. That afternoon, Sarah, Emily, and the riders followed the outreach workers to their new home, a small apartment above a bakery on Oak Street. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the open windows. It wasn't a high-rise, but it was warm, safe, and theirs. When Sarah stepped inside, her knees almost gave out. It wasn't the furniture. There wasn't much of it yet. It was the peace. Emily spun around laughing, her blue dress fluttering. "Mama, we have a kitchen and a big window." Sarah knelt, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "Yes, baby, we do." Bear set the grocery bags on the counter while Jake leaned against the doorway, watching quietly. "You like it?" Jake asked. Sarah nodded, wiping her face. "It's perfect. I still can't believe people did all this for me." Jake shrugged. "Sometimes the world just needs someone brave enough to start the story." Sarah smiled faintly. "I wasn't brave. I was scared out of my mind." "That's what bravery is," Jake replied. "Doing it scared." Anyway, over the next week, the apartment filled with life. Neighbors brought by donated furniture, a second-hand couch, a set of dishes, a small table with a scratch across the top that Emily decided was our lucky mark. Every day, someone new came knocking. Some with groceries, others with letters or words of encouragement. One man, the owner of a local cleaning supply company, offered Sarah a full-time position at fair pay. "Someone like you deserves better than what you had," he said. Sarah accepted, overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir." And just as he left, Jake and his crew rolled up again, parking their motorcycles neatly outside the building. The rumble of their engines was no longer a sound of fear for Sarah. It was the sound of family arriving. They spent their evenings at the bakery downstairs, sipping coffee and laughing while Emily drew pictures of motorcycles and angels on napkins. One Sunday, a small local news crew stopped by to film a short feature. They interviewed Sarah in her kitchen, sunlight pouring in through the window. "What do you want people to learn from your story?" the reporter asked. Sarah hesitated, then smiled softly. That kindness still exists and that heroes don't always wear badges or suits. Sometimes they ride bikes. The riders chuckled from behind the camera. Jake just shook his head, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Later that day, when the crew had gone, Emily came running out from her room holding a fresh drawing. This one of the new apartments surrounded by motorcycles, hearts, and smiling faces. "This is home," she said proudly, handing it to Jake. He crouched to her level, taking it gently. "You sure know how to draw feelings, kid." "I'm drawing what I see," Emily replied innocently. Jake nodded, folding the paper carefully. Then you keep seeing the good stuff. Don't ever stop. That night, as dusk fell and the city streetlights flickered to life, Sarah stood by her window, watching the riders ride off into the distance, their taillights glowing like embers in the twilight. She felt a tear slip down her cheek. But this time it was a tear of gratitude. The same city that once overlooked her now carried her story like a song. And the echo of Emily's cry, "Please help my mommy," no longer felt like pain. It had become something else entirely. Hope. Fall came early that year. The city that once slept quietly beneath the shadow of the Hale Tower now breathed differently. Lighter, freer, as though compassion had swept through every corner and cleaned it from the inside out. For Sarah Thompson, each sunrise carried a new peace. She no longer woke to the sound of alarms and orders, but to the gentle clatter of breakfast plates and the laughter of her daughter. Their small apartment above the bakery had become a home, walls once bare now covered in Emily's drawings. Bright motorcycles, smiling faces, and one in particular that hung above the kitchen table. A picture of Jake kneeling beside her that day, moonlight behind him like a halo. "Mama," Emily said one morning, sitting cross-legged on the floor as she colored, "do you think the riders will come today?" Sarah smiled as she packed her lunch for work. "They might, baby. It's Sunday, isn't it?" Emily's eyes sparkled. "Sunday means pancakes with Mr. Jake." Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. "You remember everything, don't you?" "I remember the good stuff," Emily replied with a grin. By noon, the familiar rumble of engines filled Oak Street. Sarah didn't even flinch anymore. That sound no longer meant chaos. It meant family had arrived. The door to the bakery jingled open as 3 riders walked in, bringing the scent of wind and the road with them. Jake was first, followed by Bear and Falcon, all smiles and laughter. "Smells better than gasoline for once," Bear joked, inhaling deeply. Jake smirked. "Speak for yourself." The bakery owner, Mrs. Patel, waved from behind the counter. "Your table's waiting, boys, and the little one's pancakes are already on the grill." Emily ran up to Jake the moment he sat down, hugging him tightly around the waist. "I drew another one," she said, handing him a folded piece of paper. Jake opened it carefully. This one showed their whole group, Sarah, Emily, and the rider, sitting at a diner, sunlight spilling through the windows. Above them, Emily had written in big, uneven letters, "My family." He stared at it for a long moment, his eyes soft. Then he smiled. Not the tough rider smile, but the kind that cracks something open inside a man. "You've got some talent, kid," Emily grinned. "You're going to keep this one, too." He nodded firmly. "You bet I am." He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into the same spot inside his leather vest where he kept the first one she ever gave him. Over coffee and laughter, the afternoon drifted by. Sarah sat quietly for a while, watching them joke with Emily, helping her pour syrup, and teasing Bear about his gray beard. She couldn't help but smile. "I don't know how to thank you all," she said softly. "If you hadn't shown up that day." Jake shook his head. "Don't go down that road, Sarah. What's done is done. You survived. That's the part that matters." "I know," she said, looking out the window. "But sometimes I still see it when I close my eyes. Him yelling, her crying, me frozen." Jake leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "You want to know the truth? We all got ghosts, but you don't owe your past anything. Not your fear, not your sleep. You already paid your dues. It's time to live." Sarah looked at him, eyes glassy. "You always know what to say." He chuckled softly. "Nah, I just know what silence feels like. It's worse than pain." The room fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't heavy, but sacred. the silence that says everything has been heard. Later that evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Sarah walked Emily to the small park down the street. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings. Children played on the swings while parents chatted nearby. Emily ran ahead, her laughter ringing through the air. Sarah sat on a bench, closing her eyes and letting the sounds of life fill her ears. "Mind if I sit?" came Jake's voice beside her. She smiled without looking up. "You always find us." "Not hard to do when she laughs that loud," he said with a grin. They sat in silence for a while, watching Emily run across the grass, her blue dress fluttering in the soft wind. Sarah finally spoke. "Do you ever wonder why you were there that day?" Jake took a long breath. "Every day. Maybe I stopped for breakfast. Maybe fate stopped me. Either way, I was supposed to be there." Sarah nodded, eyes glistening. "You were." She turned to him. "You saved me." Jake looked at her, his expression warm and steady. "No, Sarah, she saved you. We just answered her cry." As dusk turned to night, Emily ran back and climbed onto the bench between them, holding her mama's hand and Jake's gloved one in her other. "You both my heroes," she said sleepily, resting her head on her mother's arm. Sarah kissed her forehead, whispering, "You're ours too, baby." Jake smiled faintly. "She's got your spirit." Sarah laughed quietly. "I hope she's got your courage." He shrugged. "She's already got more than both of us combined." The sky darkened into shades of violet, the last streaks of orange fading behind the horizon. Jake stood to leave, glancing at the child, now fast asleep in her mother's arms. He hesitated, then reached into his vest and pulled out both of Emily's drawings. "Keep these safe," he said softly, handing them to Sarah. She frowned. "You sure?" "Yeah," he said. "They belong to where they started." Sarah took them gently, her heart full. "Thank you." As Jake walked back toward his bike, parked under the streetlight, the sound of the engine rolled softly through the park. Not loud, not angry, but like a heartbeat fading into the distance. Sarah watched him ride away, the light glinting off his vest where her daughter's first drawing had once rested. She whispered into the night, "You don't ignore a cry like that." Emily stirred slightly in her sleep, mumbling, "Love you, Mama." Sarah smiled, her tears catching the light of the street lamp. "I love you too, baby." And as she sat beneath the quiet sky, the world around her felt new again. A world where kindness still rode on two wheels, and angels sometimes wore leather. If you enjoyed the story, do check out the next story, because we have prepared a collection of stories that you will find even much more interesting than the one you just watched. Click on the video showing on your screen right now to enjoy. Thank you.